I'm Jamie from Pan MacMillan. We're very proud to sponsor the Harrogate Festival this year, and we have what we're calling our Dead Giveaways tent, where we're giving away we're doing raffles for books, giving away merch, we're giving away samplers, so please come and say hi to our authors, say hi to us. We'll be here throughout the whole festival. Really pleased to be working with Chris from the Writing Community podcast, who's going to be recording this interview, and he's been fantastic at doing our Q&As, and we also have a special guest Q&A person, Tina Baker. Very nice. And they will both be interviewing the fantastic D.V. Bishop, and we'll be talking about historical fiction. D.V. Bishop is the author of the Cesare Aldo series, a fantastic series which has just been recently, The Darkest Sin, the second book in the series, was recently awarded the coveted CWA Historical Dagger, which is a big prize, and very good. And the latest book in the series, Ritual of Fire, has been longlisted for the Macoveni 2023, which is also fantastic. So we're really proud and delighted to be joined by D.V. Bishop here today to talk about his books, talk about the Cesare Aldo series and historical fiction in general. So without further ado, let's hand over to D.V. Bishop. Thank you.
Nice round of applause. Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming over. We haven't got a projection microphone. If you want to come closer, please feel free to do so. We are going to talk about David's introduction into the writing world, about his new book. If you have got questions, you are welcome to give us your attention, and we will come and get those questions off you. But generally, please enjoy, and we're going to get stuck into this. Thank you, Tina, for joining us as well. How are you doing? How is the festival? Have you been before? Is the big question.
I have. Can you all hear me at the back? Yes. Excellent. Sorry, I'll be projecting to the back row. This is not my first festival. I was fortunate enough to be on a panel last year up in the car park.
In the big tent.
And I was here 7 years ago as a reader and as a prospective writer. And I came along to Creative Thursday and learned a lot on Creative Thursday from the amazing authors they had there. And then started writing the first Cesare Aldo novel 6 months later.
Wow. And
then, was here in 2019, met my editor Alex for the first time at Harrogate. He took me out to lunch, which was very nice. Thank you, Alex. And we just signed the deal for the books. So so Harrogate and the books and me have a nice link together.
Definitely. There's a lot to take from that for someone who might be here as the first timer, or someone that's here to enjoy it as a reader who's getting into that writing world. So to hear your transition into that is fantastic. So what advice have you got for someone who's in that position, who may be going to these events for the writing classes and for the networking, which obviously is a big part of it as well? What advice have you got for them?
I mean, I haven't got any wildly revelatory advice that you probably haven't heard before if you're an emerging writer. I would say a great writer is a good reader first. They read a lot. So if you want to write in a particular subgenre within crime fiction, because we're all here for crime fiction, then read as much as you can within that subgenre. So I'm writing historical thrillers, so I'm reading a lot of great historical writers. And even though I'm now being published, I'm still reading as many as I can. So, get hold of the likes of Vasim Khan and Abir Mukherjee and Laura Shepherd Robinson and Andrew Taylor, and the list goes on, frankly. If you're going to read in a subgenre, write in a subgenre, absolutely read in a subgenre. And then the other thing, which is actually probably the hardest part, which is just sit down and write, and then keep writing and keep going, and just keep the faith, actually. The first thing that you write is not going to be the best thing that you write. And the other thing I would say is you can't fix a draft you haven't finished. So write to the finish. It may be a big load of bobbins, but you can fix a big load of bobbins. But if you haven't written anything, you can't fix it.
Absolutely, yeah, great advice. So your transition into the writing world in the first place, was there any kind of inspirational character for you, or a story you read that really inspired you in the writing world? Obviously you mentioned about being here and being around this community anyway, so was it something specific, or was it always on the cards for you to write?
I've always going to be a writer. It's just a case of how and when. I was one of those kids at school that was either in the library or talking. So I was either reading or I was the person who was getting told off for talking too much in class. So it's quite helpful, actually, as a writer, being a screaming extrovert, which means coming to events like this is it's just catnip for me. Love the sound of my own voice, can't shut me up. If I do talk too much, just tell me to shut up, and I will take the hint. But no, so no, it was just I read it voraciously as a kid, and then I started writing, James Bond, 003 and a half, teen secret agent, and I wrote myself into Famous Five stories.
Nice.
Because weirdly, I always wanted to be kidnapped. I'm not sure what that says about my upbringing, but there it is.
Amazing, yeah. Is anyone else here for the first time? A couple of people. Well, what
Loads
advice,
of people.
As a serial Harrogate comer, what advice have you got for someone who's here for the first time?
Okay, so you're going to be in queues quite a bit of the time, but that's brilliant. So what you do is you turn around and you talk to the person behind you in the queue and just say hi, introduce yourself, ask them what they're here to see, who they're excited to see, ask them what was the really good book they read. And they go, oh, brilliant, because a good reading recommendation's always welcome as far as I'm concerned. And just get to know the people around you in the queue. So there were people, when I did Creative Thursday, there was a woman in front of me in the queue called Nell. She's here somewhere. And we're both published authors now. The woman behind us in the queue was Liz. We're going out to dinner, I think, tonight from memory. So we made friends in the queue here at Harrogate, and we all stay in touch and keep talking. So it's weird. In a queue, it's not the worst place you can be.
Fantastic advice, yeah. Tina, any questions?
Well, it is my first time and I've always wanted to try this, so...
Windy.
Oggy, oggy, oggy! Box, box, box! No, try it again. Oggy, oggy, oggy! Box, box, box! Oggy! Box! Oggy! Box! Oggy, oggy, oggy! Box, box, box! I'm not Pan MacMillan. That's a disclaimer, but yeah, you asked the question of everybody assumes if you've written a book then you're not shy. I think I'm more shy now because people might not have liked your book. And mine came out in the pandemic, so I did no festivals, and now, I went up and said hello to you. I'm that brave now. I just go and say hello to people. Me and Chris have only met today for the first time. One of the very first interviews, if not the first interviews I did, and Zoom kept me going through lockdown, through Out to Shield as well, Dodgy Lungs, and that show, the Writing Community Chat show, kept me going, so we bonded.
We have, yeah. Very much so recently with a big hug. So it's amazing to talk about the online community through lockdown. I'm sure writers are quite often in their own space anyway, and readers as well. So I'm not sure from a reader's perspective as well, has the community online community during lockdown enhanced your kind of reader range and your author profile and your readership? Has that improved for lockdown, or is that something that was a negative impact, for example, on book launches?
Yeah, well, the first book in the series, City of Vengeance, came out February 2021.
Right.
So absolute lockdown, all the bookshops were shut, and you're sort of tearing your hair out thinking, this was not when you sign the contract and it's like the life's dream of I'm going to write a crime novel and get it published. Yeah. And then you think, so I signed my contract in 2019 and then COVID happened. You think, oh, we'll be fine. This will be over soon. And then 2021, you're like, well, maybe not. So no, it was a tough time, but I think a lot of publishers were very understanding of the fact that we weren't going to be able to, have those personal events. So a lot of them pivoted really well, and also the independent bookshops in particular were really great for me. There were 3 independent bookshops in Scotland that teamed up as the We 3 Indies, and they did a load of book launches, and they were really supportive, and that's continued after all the lockdowns have lifted, fortunately.
It's incredible that bookshops managed to survive through that as well, and it's really important to support local bookshops. There's a fantastic one up the road there as well. But looking at your book here, Ritual of Fire, fantastic cover as part of one of the giveaways today at some point. Could you let everyone know a bit about this, and then we can look at kind of how that process came around and how the idea of this was born?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ritual of Fire, it's the 3rd book in the Cesare Aldo series. They're historical thrillers set in Renaissance Florence. And the main character, Cesare Aldo, he works for the most feared criminal court in Renaissance Florence. So they have the power of life and death over the citizens, effectively. So he investigates crimes for the court, which is known as the Otto. And in the book, 40 years earlier, some of you may have heard of, there was a guy called Savonarola who was a Franciscan monk, and he organized the bonfire of the vanities in Renaissance Florence. So he believed that the people of Florence were far too much into gambling and drinking and other illicit, ungodly activities. So he used to give sermons in the main cathedral, and half the city, 30,000 people, would crowd into this cathedral to hear him speak. And they all, basically, it was sort of like religious fundamentalism at its most fervent. And he had the city in the palm of his hand for about 2 years. And he got all the artists had to give up their artwork, wigs, dresses, fancy dresses, makeup, musical instruments, books, paintings, and they were all put into a big pile in the biggest square in town and burnt while people stood around and sung hymns. But he overstretched himself, he got excommunicated by the Pope within a year, and then they hung him in the main square and set fire to his body because justice. 40 years after the fact is where my book starts, so it's the 40th anniversary of the execution of Savonarola, this lightning rod figure in the history of Florence. And a man is a rich merchant, he's tied to a gibbet, he's on top of a cart, he's pushed out into the main square as dawn breaks, and they set fire to him, they burn him alive 40 years after the fact. And everybody's like, well, what does this mean? Is this the spirit of Savonarola has come back, or are people trying to bring back this sort of crazed religious fundamentalism? And so my characters have to investigate, because somebody is basically capturing rich merchants, the 1%, the people who don't pay their tax, and setting fire to them in the middle of town. So that's the story.
It's an incredible story. What's really exciting about the thought of this is rewriting history and historical fiction. It's something that people really like to do, but how do you approach that with the caution that might be needed when it comes to repeating history factually? And as someone who might be writing historical fiction for the first time, what advice have you got as stepping into that, as in approaching it in the right way?
I mean, when it comes to writing historical fiction, I'm with, as far as I'm concerned, you can't go wrong than following the example of Hilary Mantel, who wrote Wolf Hall and things. And she said, you don't need to change history to suit your story. You should make your story fit the template of history, because there's enough gaps in history. We don't know everything that happened. We don't know every moment of history. So there's plenty of opportunities. If you're a writer with imagination, you should be able to find moments in history where you can insert your characters and tell a good story, hopefully. Yep. So that's what I do. I do my research, which takes a lot of time, it has to be said. But because it's a series, it's cumulative, so I've built up a knowledge now. Yeah. And then I try and go, okay, so what happened at this point in time, and how can I build a story out of that? So Ritual of Fire, there's a heat wave. It's summer 1538, and there's a heat wave, and that actually happened. There was a heat wave in that summer, there was a drought, they were really struggling, and it caused a lot of basically near riots. And there's actually a bit towards the end of the book where they get this painting of the Madonna. That's Mother Mary, not Madonna the singer, obviously. That would have been weird. Which was deemed, the painting of the Mother of Christ was paraded through the city because it was believed that this would protect the city from plagues, famines, plagues, and something else, whatever it was. And so it did, and this heat wave, and then they paraded this painting through the city, and this really happened, and then the rain started falling, and they went, oh, we're saved. So that's one of the things that I leaned into when I was writing the book, real history.
Fantastic.
Would you fancy doing anything modern? Ever?
Maybe. The thing I love about writing historical fiction is that there's no mobile phones, there's no CCTV, there's no DNA, which is great most of the time, because it means that your detectives have to be smarter. They can't rely on science to get them out to solve the case for them. The downside is that if they ever want to send a message to somebody, or they have to go somewhere, they have to walk or get on a horse, and it just takes forever. So actually in the book, it's a home and away fixture. It's in the city of Florence, but it's also up in the Tuscan hills. Because if you were rich enough, then you went to your country estate up in the hills where there were lovely breezes. While everybody was sweating and sweltering in the city, you just retired to your hillside mansion and went, lovely, very nice. So it means that because the story's out in the countryside and in the city, people have to try and get messages back and forth, and that's a little bit tiresome as a writer.
Yeah, I bet. Has there been an occasion then where historical fiction has driven you to explore a location in real life? Have you had a research holiday in the name of writing?
Oh, yeah.
Come.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. This is another reason why I like to set my book in Florence,
Yes,
obviously,
of course,
because every holiday is a research trip, and theoretically, at least, tax deductible. Me and my accountant are still having a slight disagreement about that, but I'm going to persuade them eventually. I've been to Florence several times.
Okay.
The last time I was there was September 2019, and actually we stayed in a small village out of Florence. And that's the location for half the book, is the small village, which is still there today, 500 years later. But now you can get the bus into town, and it's €2. It's a bargain, I have to say, and it's every quarter of an hour. I mean, if the buses were that cheap and fast round here, I'd be like...
Yeah, definitely. Public transport's got a lot to answer for.
Yes.
So has there been anything that kind of surprised you on these trips when perhaps you thought you knew the situation and what you were writing about, and suddenly you had to change your approach because you learned something new?
Oh, you never know everything. I mean, before I started writing the first book, I spent 20 years trying to learn everything I could. Wrote the book and immediately discovered I'd got at least 3 things wrong. They didn't have pews in churches in 1536. A friend of mine, one of the people I mentioned earlier, Liz, she read an advanced draft of Ritual of Fire and said, "This is lovely, David. You know, burning people, lovely." But they didn't have the tomato yet in Italy. And I'm like, oh.
Wow.
So I had to there's a tomato stew was going to be a crucial moment in the story. And I was like, no tomatoes. Can you imagine Italian cooking without tomatoes? It's just, apparently they thought they were poisonous and they used to have them as table decorations. So you could point at the poisonous red thing.
That's incredible, yeah.
Yeah, but the other thing I found out last time I was in Florence, I always do a walking tour because there's always something new to learn. And they said, down the road there is the church of San Felice, which is St. Felix.
Right.
And that's where they do the exorcisms on a Wednesday. I was like, sorry, Wednesday is exorcism day. And they go, yeah. So the book I'm writing at the moment, which is number 4, which will be out next summer, it's all about serial killers and exorcisms.
Nice.
So that came in handy.
Yeah, I mean, when you're researching serial killers, exorcisms, I mean, physically you can see the locations, but how do you do that as a writer to make the reader feel engaged and make them feel that that's a realistic kind of presentation of that area?
Yeah, I mean, I think particularly with historical fiction, immersing you in the time and the place, so you as a reader feel like, hopefully, you're being transported there.
Yeah.
So one of the things I always think about is, because everybody will write, what you can see and what characters can hear, but I always try and think about what does it smell like? I always try and give each location a distinctive smell, and often a whole book will have a distinctive smell. So the second one in the series is The Darkest Sin, which is a locked room murder mystery set in a convent. And I've been told by other people that the whole book smells of lavender, basically. So everywhere they go inside the convent, it's the smell of lavender blooming. So now there's a writer friend of mine, and she complains she can't smell lavender without thinking of my second book now.
Fantastic.
She's very complaining about that.
Yeah.
So smells, and then the texture of something under your fingers. You can really make you feel like you're in a place if you can feel, I don't know, stone rubbing against your fingertips.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And that's great advice for anyone writing in that and may not have thought about that when their writing process happens. So yeah, really fantastic advice. You mentioned that it's part of a series. Writing series is a fantastic thing for the reader if they're into it. How do you ensure people, when they read the first book, want to continue that story?
Well, I cheated in my case because I put a big old shock twist, revelation, cliffhanger-y thing at the end of book 1, which I thought, I mean, it's a bit cheeky, and I was worried that readers would be like, no, you can't do that.
Yeah.
But equally, I was hoping they'd go, when's the next one? And then the end of book 2, something happens at the end of that might make you want to pick up the next one, he said, hopefully, to see what happens. And then the other thing with a series, the joy of writing a series for me, is that you can have returning characters. and you can start to build a sort of ensemble cast of characters, some of whom are in all of the books, some of whom come in and out of the series. So I like doing that, and I'll get readers saying, oh, are we going to see more of Saul, who's a Jewish doctor who's the sort of on-again, off-again boyfriend of my main character, Cesare, because they live in a time and a place where being gay is punishable by death, potentially. So they have to be, keep it all on the DL as to what they're doing. Yes.
Do you have to be very careful when you're writing a book with a big cliffhanger to have the next book ready? Because if that's not ready and you leave your readers on a cliffhanger, are you fearful that they might just move on from that because it's not available so quickly afterwards?
I mean, I try and make sure that each book has got a complete story within it and a emotionally satisfying ending for the main plot. And it's more to do with things that are happening with the characters that might make you want to come back for next time, as how are the characters going to be, a year later, 18 months later. And also I do the books in real time, so we're moving forward through time with the characters. So there's one character who at the start of the first book was sort of like quite an innocent character and new to Florence. And I'm writing in book 4, and they've now got a child of 2 and another one on the way. And so they're going on a big old journey. So I mean, readers love stories, but what they really love is if they find a character they love and they want to know more about what that character's going to do next. As a reader, that's what gets me continuing to read a series, is what is, Tilly and Poe going to do in their next story in the M.W. Craven books, which I just read on holiday a couple of weeks ago.
Fantastic. Guys, if you have got questions, in a second I will come out and see if anyone's got questions for our author. Tina, have you got anything else?
Well, I write standalones, and I've always been fascinated by people who write the whole arcs through series. Is there any character you just think, I just can't write them anymore, I'm sick of them? Do you then kill them off if it is a series?
I haven't had that yet. There's one character who I introduced in book 1, and my editor said, oh, this character deserves to die in book 1. They deserve their comeuppance. And I was like, no, that's book 3. Their comeuppance is coming in book 3, so you just have to wait for that.
So you had that future plan all along. You've got the whole...
For that, that guy deserved what he gets coming to him, absolutely, yeah. And then there's another character, which is Aldo's evil stepmother, Lucrezia, who refuses to die. She's hanging on by these very long talon-like fingernails. So I thought she might die in book 4, but actually I've nearly finished writing book 4, and there simply wasn't enough room at the inn for her to go in the book as well.
Book 5, we're looking at
possibly
getting. Okay.
She might come to a conclusion in book 5. We'll see. She's resilient.
When you're writing a series, do you get feedback from the readers of that series to know if it should keep going or not, or is that a thing where you figure out whether it's still being pursued in that way, that you want to keep writing that story? Sales is obviously a good indicator as to whether or not you get to write some more books.
And then the engagement you get from readers, people who get in contact with me through the website, or I meet them at festivals or book signings and bookshops. So that all helps. And also, I'm early doors. This is only book 3. I've got a lot more stories to tell yet. So yes.
Excellent. Yeah. Anyone got a question before we wrap this up? Yeah, one there.
Just curious as to how have they gone down in Italy?
Nice, good question.
Great question.
Yes. So the question was, how have the books gone down in Italy? Well, they haven't been published in Italian yet.
Right.
However, I've had people who've gone to Florence and have gone into some of the gift shops and the various palazzo, and they're on sale in English in Florence. So I'm going to Florence in December. So I'm definitely going to be like,
yeah. Keep us posted on that one.
I just stand there for the whole trip.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us. We've run out of time, so we have to wrap this up. Dave, you've been fantastic. Thank you, Tina, for helping us out, and thank you guys for joining us here. Thank you.
So thank you for taking the time to fill me in on your exciting weekend ahead. Hi Phil, I'm at the Harrogate Crime Writers Festival with my sister Julie and her husband Hugh. I am Chris, host of the Writing Community Chat Show, and I'll be interviewing authors all weekend for the big Pan MacMillan Publishing Company. Do you know what? I love the Harrogate Crime Writers Festival. I can't make it this year, and I'm really sad. I normally go. And if you've never heard of it, it's basically all the crime writers that you see in your bookshops. They're all there. It's really informal, and it's held at the old Swan Hotel. And the reason it's held there is because supposedly that's the hotel where Agatha Christie turned up in the late 30s after she'd gone missing, right? And it's an amazing story. I don't know if you know this story, but she goes missing and there's a big national search for Agatha Christie, right? Obviously very famous in her day, not just latterly. And they bring in Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock stories, to try and find her. Can you imagine that now? Imagine someone famous going missing now and they bring in Lee Child to conduct the search. It's crazy, isn't it? But that's a true story.